Hey, we are getting to the end of our short series that we've been doing on our vision and values, and we're just about there. We have 2 more weeks in this, and we have been looking at why we are here as a church and what this whole thing is about. And we keep drilling back and reminding ourselves of that because it's so easy to forget. It's so easy to lose direction, to be headed somewhere, and then all of a sudden, where am I going again? And so we need to come back and look at the Bible and see what God has for us. And we have clearly seen in God's word that we are created for a relationship with God. And for that to happen, our sin needs to be dealt with. And God's will is for him to deliver you from your sin, from the power of sin, and then have a relationship with him. And this happens when he saves us, when he makes us alive in Christ. And then God's will after that is to make us more and more like Jesus. In fact, we refer to that, or the Bible refers to that, as us being conformed or transformed to the image of his Son. God's will for you is clearly have a relationship with him, and that happens from forgiveness through Jesus Christ. And then God's will for your life, I can say it here categorically, clear, easy. God's will is to make you like his Son. And that's a process of sanctification. And that's discipleship. We come to Christ, receive life in his name, and then he begins to make us more and more like himself. And as a follower of Jesus, God's will for you also is that now that you know him and are enjoying a relationship with him, God's will is for you to make more disciples. We see that in Matthew chapter 28. That is God's will for everyone, not just the pastors, not just your community group leaders, not just your ministry team leaders, not just our kids ministry team or the teachers there. If you know Jesus, God's will for you is to make more followers of Jesus. And we do that in a lot of ways, and we've been looking at that in this series. We've looked at how God is going to use the biblical values we get out of the scriptures, the values of truth and grace and community that we've looked at. And then today, participation, and next week we'll be looking at faith, how God's going to use all of those to help us in making disciples. So last week, we saw we were created for relationship, for community with each other, with God, and community is formed in relationship. And as we are in community with each other, in relationship, the church, we naturally become participants or partners in the gospel, helping each other to know God, who he is, and to grow in him. And that's what this gospel partnership is all about. That's why being part of a local church is essential to being a follower of Jesus. We need to be connected within the bride of Christ. The bride of Christ is the church of Jesus Christ. We need to be connected with each other. We need to have a location to belong, a group of people, this community, God's people. So today, as we go further, we're going to take a look at this idea of participation or partnership in the gospel. And that's something we talk about here at the Fields all the time. We talk about it every Sunday. And it's so central to what God has called us to be and what we're about. So let me read that for you. It's on the back of your program. It's going to be on the screens. But just let me read that value to you. Participation. God has called each one of us to use the talents and gifts he's given us to bless him and others. That means we are participants in, not merely consumers of, the gospel. Every person is a player on the team, not just a spectator. Now, to take a look at this participation, we're going to look at Paul's relationship with the believers in the city of Philippi. And it's in his opening salutation in this letter that Paul writes to them that he talks about this gospel partnership he has with these believers. And it lays out the model for what partnership or participation in the gospel is to look like. And that's where we got the name of our class. Pastor John was up here. He was talking about that class that starts today after second service, gospel partnership. We do it every quarter. How do we partner together for the sake of the gospel? Now, in Philippians, it's a relatively short letter written by the Apostle Paul to a church that God used him and his team to establish, to plant. It's located in modern-day Greece. Roughly 12 years earlier to this letter, Paul, on what's called his second missionary journey, rolls into town. It's a fascinating story. You can find it in the book of Acts, chapter 16. In fact, I want to encourage you this week, before you get into your community groups, go read Acts chapter 16, because you see the founding of this church. And for me as a church planner and coaching church planners and our church being a church planting church, I love to read how churches are established. And we see this in this account. And basically what happens is Paul rolls in with no core group to start with. He rolls into town with a couple of friends, and they share the gospel. Some people get saved, and in the face of a ton of opposition, this church was established. And that is so encouraging to me. God builds his church. It's his job. He does that against all the odds, and I take great comfort in knowing that Jesus loves his church more than I do. And so it's great to see that. Now, 12 years later, Paul is in prison in Rome. Why is he in prison in Rome? Because he's been preaching this gospel. And just like some of you, he's feeling the heat. Now, we don't feel the heat in the U.S. like some of our brothers and sisters around the world. We're feeling it, at least some of us are. But we have brothers and sisters around the world, even to this day, that are being jailed and are being killed for preaching the gospel. That's exactly what was going on with Paul. He's thrown in prison for preaching the gospel. And so he writes a letter to these believers in the city of Philippi, and that letter is in your Bible. It's called Philippians, and we're going to be in that this morning. In fact, you can turn to Philippians chapter 1. Now, most of Paul's letters were written to correct theological teaching or practice, Christian practice. In fact, much of the New Testament wouldn't exist if those New Testament churches were not so jacked up. They were messed up. And so Paul writes to correct theological error. He writes to correct moral practice. They were doing crazy things morally that God said don't do. And so he writes these letters. But what's amazing here in the letter to the Philippians is there's not a lot of correction in this letter. It's basically a healthy church. I would say it's kind of like the Fields. I mean, we have our problems, but we are so thankful for you and what God has done in your lives and what we're seeing. We all have sin to confess and repent of, and we all have messiness in our lives. But in general, the Fields is known as a healthy church, and that's like the church in Philippi. There was a squabble between two ladies, Euodia and Syntyche, and then later Paul's going to say, hey, would you guys stop arguing, just get along? But in general, a healthy church. And so basically, this letter is a thank you letter. He's writing to thank them for their partnership in the gospel, for their participation in the gospel. And we're going to see that they partnered with him in a lot of ways. One of them, in fact, the main thrust of the letter is a financial partnership. But sometimes we look at this letter and we think that's all there is. No, there was way more they were doing than just writing the check. They did do that, but there was so much more. And so we're going to explore that this morning. But in Philippians chapter 1, verse 3, Paul is using these words as an introduction where he says this, I thank my God in all my remembrance of you, always offering prayer with joy in my every prayer for all of you. As he thinks about these believers, as he thinks about the believers in Philippi, as I think about the believers here at the Fields, thank you. I have joy in my heart because of you. Thank you for your partnership. And he goes on, he says, in view of your partnership, or depending on your translation, participation in the gospel from the first day, until now. Paul is thankful and joyful because he's thinking about their partnership or participation in the gospel. Now, the Greek word here used for partnership or participation is koinonia. Some of you are familiar. In fact, there are churches out there called Koinonia Fellowship, which is a silly name for a church because it means fellowship. I don't know why you would call your church that, but anyways, it's this idea of, the Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Rings. They have banded together as brothers and sisters for the sake of the gospel. Basically, they have joined Paul in the trenches and also on the mountaintops in a partnership for the gospel. Now, before we look at the details of how they participated in the gospel, I briefly want to look at the driving force for their participation. That's incredibly important. It's essential here. What is it that gets these Philippian believers involved? Why do the Philippians have a passion to participate? And this passion comes from and is about the gospel. That is their driving force. It's about the gospel. If you take notes on your outline, write down. It's about the gospel. Look at this. Paul, elsewhere in 1 Corinthians 9:23, says his life is all about the gospel. He says this, I do all things for the sake of the gospel, so that I may become a fellow partaker of it. The gospel is what he is about, and it's what we are about at the Fields here. The gospel is an awe-inspiring story. It's a compelling story. Yes, there's tragedy in it. Sin is terrible. That's the truth. Sin separates us from God. But the beauty of the story is that God in his grace does something about that tragedy. He rescues us through the work of his Son, Jesus Christ. And the gospel is not only the power of salvation to all who believes, but it is also the power to transform our lives. It's the gospel that enables us to be more like Jesus, to restore broken relationships with God and with each other, to enter into and live in community like we talked about last week. It continues to work in our lives to restore us even after salvation. It allows us to look in the mirror every day and repent, because I know there's a God that knows me and has saved me and still loves me in spite of my ugliness. The gospel allows us to expose the idols of our hearts and repent of those. And the gospel is worthy of our ongoing attention. The gospel is beautiful as it works in our lives to accomplish God's purposes. Our aim is to have the gospel drive everything we do here at the Fields. And the gospel begins with God, it is about God, and it ends with God, not us. It's his story about redeeming a people for himself, for his own glory. It's about the reign of God in his kingdom. And our goal is to make sure that the gospel is central to everything that we do here at the Fields. It guides us where we are going as a church. And so it's this gospel that Paul has built his life around, the message and the proclamation of it. And as Paul is in jail because he's been preaching this gospel message, he writes this letter telling them that he has joy about his circumstances, even in jail, in spite of these difficult circumstances, because the gospel is still going out. Philippians 1:12, he says this, now I want you to know, brethren, that my circumstances, being in jail for the sake of preaching the gospel, my circumstances have turned out for the greater progress of the gospel. He's actually saying, look, I am in jail, and it's not great to be in jail. But the good news is, guess what? The gospel is going forward even with me in jail, and that is a good thing. His life is around the progress of the gospel, and that is a life well spent. He goes on in Philippians 1:20, but that with all boldness, I'm here in jail, but with all boldness, Christ will even now, as always, be exalted in my body, whether by my life or my death. For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. As long as the gospel is going forward, whether in his life or in his death, Paul is good with that. Now, for us, it might be tempting to say, well, that's good for Paul because he wrote part of the Bible. That's good for Paul because he met Jesus face to face. That's good for Paul because he lived 2,000 years ago. But I'm not a pastor. I'm not an apostle. I'm not a Paul. I can't live my life like him. But listen to what he says. He challenges us. Philippians 3:17, he says this, brethren, join in following my example and observe those who walk according to the pattern you have in us. If we are followers of Jesus, we're all called to be ambassadors for the gospel. We're all called to participate in the gospel. We're all called to center our lives around the gospel of Jesus Christ. And these Philippian believers were following Paul's example. They too were living for the gospel, and Paul thanks them for that. You know, Christianity is not a spectator sport. I coached my kids in soccer for 19 years. I coach in surfing now. And I grew up playing soccer. And something I've noticed about me is actually any sport I'm watching. Be careful if you're around me, because I'm on the sidelines coaching and I get twitch. I want to kick the ball. It's like, make that, or I want to cut or duck into the barrel. My body, I want to get off the bench and get into the game. I've got even way more passion for the gospel game. I'm here as a Christian, both as a player and a coach. I'm not just coaching you and then just going back into my house and hiding. No, I'm a player too. I'm out there too, confessing my sins. I'm out there trying to tell people this good news, just like you guys. And one of the significant things we can all do to grow is get off the bench and get into the game. Christianity is a team effort. We all are needed to accomplish what God has set before us. 1 Corinthians 12 talks about the importance of all the gifts. You don't need to come up here and speak. Maybe you would rather speak than me. Maybe God's calling you to do that. Praise God. You don't need to be like me. I don't need to be like you. God has gifted you, though, it says in 1 Corinthians 12, to play a role on the team. There was an American Youth Soccer Organization, AYSO. It was founded in 1964 in Torrance, California, where my wife and I grew up. 2 German immigrants that were aerospace engineers, like my wife and I. They started it. And their theme for that organization was everyone plays. Everyone plays. In AYSO, I don't know if it's that way now, but it used to be that didn't matter if you didn't even know how to kick a ball. They got you onto the field because everyone is a team member that participates. It's a great model for their church. Everyone plays. And the heart of the person who's been transformed by the gospel is the one who participates. We don't participate out of guilt. It's just that you can't keep us on the bench. We want to get out there. When my kids were little and I was working around the house, invariably I would have one of the boys or my daughter come up and say, "Daddy, can I help you?" Now that's music to my ears. They couldn't really help me that much. And now that they're older and they can and they don't, well, that's a different story, right? But they want to participate. Actually, they do help out still. I love that. Unfortunately, many Christians view their involvement like spectators at a football game. Super Bowl last week? Yeah, last week. 22 players on the field in desperate need of rest and 50,000 fans in the stadium in desperate need of exercise, right? That's not the way the Church of Jesus Christ is meant to be. We get in there and participate. We get to play, and that's incredible for us. It's the driving motivation of the gospel. It's beautiful. Check out what our friend Matt Chandler says. Because of the gospel, we serve. Because our hearts are overwhelmed with gratitude. Because of the gospel, believers can serve in freedom and joy. If a lack of serving pervades a church culture, the answer is not to crank up the guilt and arm twisting, but rather to instill a new, intense focus and awareness on the gospel. Folks, we will not guilt you into service. That's not what we do here. If you feel guilt, it's your deal, not us. We invite you to participate. We create opportunities. We say, get in the game with us. Get in the water. It's good. The waves are great today. Come paddle out with us. Now, what I want to do for the remainder of our time is look at some very specific ways that the Philippians participated or partnered in the gospel with Paul. The things that motivated Paul to send them the thank you letter that he sent them. And we're going to see some very clear and practical things that we can copy and emulate as we participate in the gospel. And as I talk through them, I want you to be thinking about how you can participate like the Philippians did. Now, I think I have 5 or 6 things. You can write them down, and I'll be clear when we move from one to the next. But the first thing I want to focus on, how they partnered in the gospel, is they partnered in the gospel by giving of themselves personally. They were personally involved. Speaking of the church in Philippi, Paul uses them as an example of participation in the gospel for the church in Corinth. He writes this in 2 Corinthians 8:5. Speaking of the Philippians, he says, they gave themselves to the Lord and to us by the will of God. And he says they first did this. Before they wrote the check, before they suffered, we're going to look at all these different things, they gave of themselves first. They sent a guy named Epaphroditus to meet Paul's need when he was in jail. Philippians 2, Paul thanks them for this gift of a person. He says this, "But I thought it necessary to send to you Epaphroditus, my brother and fellow worker, co-ergon, and fellow soldier, who is also your messenger and minister to my need, because he was longing for you all and was distressed because you had heard that he was sick." They had sent Epaphroditus, one of their own, to minister to Paul while he's in jail. From Philippi over to Rome. They had to cross either landmass or ocean to get there. It took some effort. And while he was there, Epaphroditus got sick. They sent him to meet a need for Paul, and he got sick. For indeed, he was sick to the point of death. But God had mercy on Epaphroditus, and not only on him, but also on me, so I would not have sorrow upon sorrow. See, if this guy had died, Paul would have been bummed, the Philippians would have been bummed. Therefore, I sent him all the more eagerly, sent him back to you, so that when you see him again, you may rejoice, and I may be less concerned about you. Receive him then in the Lord with all joy, and hold men like him in high regard, because he came close to death. Why? Because he decided to go on a tourist vacation? No, he came close to death for the work of Christ, risking his life to complete what was deficient in your service to me. Their partnership involved personal effort, danger, great risk. So the question for us is, are we willing to get involved in each other's lives for the sake of the gospel? Or are we going to stay on the outside looking in? You know, last week we talked about relationships. Remember, community. The church is not a meeting, it's an identity. It's who we are. We are called the people of God. You know, when I'm at home and I'm talking to my wife or kids, and I'm like, hey, I'm going to go down to this thing here. What do we call this? The building, not the church. This is not a church. We are the church, the identity. You get it? I don't tell my kids, I'm going to church, unless it's this gathering during the week when you guys aren't here. I'm like, I'm going to the building. I'm going to the office. Because we are the church. It's relational. It's community. Participation means getting involved with others, opening up. Are you willing to open up your lives to the broken people around you? Maybe those EGRs. You know what EGRs are? Come on. Thank you. Those people, extra grace required, right? That's all of you. Come on. That's me for sure. I know I need extra grace from you guys, okay? It's hard. But that's risk, that's sacrifice. Jesus did it. Are you willing to get hurt for the sake of the gospel? I heard this question a long time ago, and I thought it was profound. Do we have a default setting in our lives to serve others, to serve other people, even those that are not in our tribe? Here's what's wild in our culture. You know, self-denial has become a sin in our culture, and self-fulfillment the new virtue. Isn't that amazing? Our culture, like so many things, has flipped it on its head. The new virtue is, what do I get? Self-fulfillment. Self-denial, that's a sin in our culture. But that's not the culture of the Church of Jesus Christ. We have been blessed so that we can bless others. He's given us forgiveness so now we can forgive others. He's given us a relationship with him so now we can have great relationships with others. He's given us gifts and skills so now we can participate with him in what he's doing. And in this we find the truth that Jesus taught, that whoever loses his life for his sake will find it, and whoever tries to find his life will lose it. One of the biggest strengths of the church is that it's relational. The women and men deeply care about each other and the gospel. We are going to war in the trenches together. Relationship is messy, but it's okay because we have a gospel that cleans up those messes. Well, how else do the Philippians partner with Paul in the gospel? Well, I mentioned this at the beginning. What maybe the big impetus for this letter is they partnered in the gospel by giving financially. They gave sacrificially so the work of the gospel could be done and the message could go out. Philippians 4:15, we read this. He says to them, "You yourselves know, Philippians, that at the first preaching of the gospel after I left Macedonia, no church shared with me in the matter of giving financially and receiving. No one else did but you alone. For even in Thessalonica, you sent a gift of money," that's what he's talking about, "more than once for my needs," as he was doing gospel ministry. And he goes, "Not that I seek the gift itself, but I seek the profit which increases to your account. But I have received everything in full and have an abundance. I am amply supplied, having received from Epaphroditus what you sent, a fragrant aroma, an acceptable sacrifice, well-pleasing to God." You know what's interesting about the church in Philippi? These guys were the poor kids on the block. They didn't have much, and yet they gave in spite of their need, and they gave to help Paul out in this gospel ministry, and that's true gospel partnership. When these people from the Philippian church gave, it was not out of their abundance, it was out of their poverty. They weren't sitting there fat in cash, they were joyfully giving in the face of hard financial times. Listen how Paul describes them again in 2 Corinthians 8. He says this, "Now, brethren, we wish to make known to you the grace of God, which has been given in the churches of Macedonia." He's specifically talking about in Philippi. "That in a great deal of affliction, their abundance of joy and their deep poverty overflowed in the wealth of their liberality." They gave liberally. "For I testify that according to their ability and beyond their ability, they gave of their own accord." He didn't even ask. They just, "I want to give. I want to get in the game. I want to give." "Begging us with much urging for the favor of participation," there's that word again, koinonia, "in the support of the saints." You know, I've seen this principle lived out over and over again in gospel partnership. One of the things I appreciate about being a part of a church planting network like we are is as a church, we're modeling this giving, you know? We've set more than 10% aside to give away, but 10% specifically for church planting. Right now, our church is helping to fund directly at least 9 church plants. 1 in Africa, 1 in India, 3 in Australia, 1 in New Zealand, 1 in Japan, and 1 here in the U.S., and Kosi and Bella are headed, hopefully, to Japan to plant. And so what you guys give here goes to help fund those. And we've modeled this as a church and hope this model rubs off on us as individuals here that make up the fields. You know, when we were starting out, like many of our planters, I worked a full-time job at another church, or a lot of planters don't work at another church. They work in kind of secular society. I taught at a university, and I volunteered my time for the first year and a half, like everyone else. No one got paid the first year and a half at the fields. That was awesome. That was kind of better than now. You couldn't fire me, right? You know, it's like we'd stand up on a Sunday night as we gathered, like no one is here because they're paid to be here. Everyone is here because they're committed to what we're doing. We were in it with skin in the game. There was a brotherhood. We believed in the gospel just like the Philippians did and gave. It was so cool. In that same letter, Paul, thinking of the Philippian church, he instructs the church in Corinth with these words. "Now I say this, he who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and he who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. Each one must do as he has purposed in his heart, not grudgingly, under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver." We have been blessed so that we can bless others. we can't outgive God. We encourage our church planners to lead their churches from the very beginning to be people who sow generously, not out of compulsion, but out of the joy of the gospel, the joy of a heart of generosity, knowing I get to participate. You know, here at the Fields, we give as an act of worship. The God of the universe, he owns it all. Folks, we don't. You know, sometimes we give 10, 20% or whatever we've decided to give. But it's weird to think about it, but God doesn't need that money. We give out of worship, and it's good for our souls. We give of our first fruits out of generous hearts. You know, one of the coolest things I've observed over the last 15 years here, 20 years here at the Fields, is doing premarital for couples that are here at the Fields. And in that premarital, we give them an assignment. We say, go home and build a budget, okay? If you have not built a budget, come see us. You need to build a budget, not because we need your money. We don't even care about your money. We care about your health spiritually. So we can say, go build a budget. And one of the most encouraging things I've seen is invariably these young couples, and I don't know where they're getting it. Maybe they're hearing the teaching here. I don't know. But they're coming from good families or they're coming out of joy, but they come back and almost invariably they have at least 10% budgeted off the top before taxes that they're going to give to the Fields, to their local church, out of joy, not obligation. It is so encouraging to see that with this young generation. They see it as a priority, not an afterthought. And I remember how money was tight. I still remember how money is tight, but when we're first married, right? And they're out the gate budgeting for this. First fruits mean you don't give what's left over. You write that check first, and these young couples are doing it, or at least they're purposing to do that. You know, I don't know if you notice, if you've been at the Fields very long, but we've never passed an offering basket here at the Fields. Now, it's not wrong to do that. We're the only North County church, at least for years that I knew of, that doesn't do that. And it's not because giving is not important. In fact, giving is a very important part of discipleship, financial giving. It's super important. God talks about money more than he does heaven. Jesus did anyways in the Gospels. Kind of wild. But here's the deal. I've never wanted finances to be a reason for somebody to trip. Because people go, oh, all a church wants is your money. I don't want people to think that because that's not the truth. If people are going to trip, I want them to trip over the gospel. But as your shepherds, we do need to talk about the finances. Giving financially is a discipleship and gospel issue. If you're not giving of your first fruits or only tipping God, there's something going on in your heart that needs to be addressed. Giving is not compulsory, as we read. It's out of a joyful heart. See, we look at it wrong all too often. God's not impressed by the amount or the percentage. It always comes down to our hearts. See, when you give biblically your first fruits, prioritizing that check over other things as your first priority, that means you're not giving out of leftovers. Sometimes we approach with the wrong attitude. We think, how much can we afford to give? When you approach giving that way, you're approaching it as a leftover statement. Do you see that? How much can we afford to give? That's a leftovers. I'm giving God my leftovers. That's not a first fruit statement. And then what are we doing with the rest? Remember, God owns that all too. So if you're giving 20% here, God cares just as much what you're doing with that other 80%. How are you investing it wisely? For your family, for your kids? Are you staying out of debt? We are just stewards of his blessings. Sometimes we give this way. We set it and forget it. Instead of looking ways to grow in our generosity. What if after giving our first fruits, we started asking, well, how can I give more? How can I bless more? You know, God is not restrained to save by many or by few. Look at what he's done here at the Fields. But what does God want our hearts to grow in? He wants our hearts to grow in generosity, not set it and forget it. So we see this modeled by that church, by the Philippian believers. They were giving first fruits. When they didn't have it to give, they made it a priority. Now, it wasn't, though, just their financial giving. For some people, it's rather easy to write a check and go, okay, I've done my part. I've done my part. They wrote the check, but they also gave of themselves. They partnered, and you write this down, they partnered in the gospel by living righteous lives. They lived out the gospel in their lives. They lived obedient lives to God, helping to validate the message of Jesus Christ. It's terrible when the world hesitates on the message because they see the way that we Christians live. Because they see that as a contradiction. Talk can be cheap. But when our lives reflect the gospel, we let others know that we really believe what we say. Philippians 1:27, Paul says about them, only conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel. Why? So that whether I come and see you or remain absent, I will hear that you are standing firm in one spirit with one mind, striving together, what? For the faith of the gospel. Philippians 2:14, do all things without grumbling or disputing, so that you will prove yourselves to be blameless and innocent, children of God, above reproach in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you appear as lights in the world. We live this way because of what God has done for us and because of our mission. Just like tithing, it's done out of gratitude. It's a fruit. It's out of gratitude that we live this way, by the power of God working in us that cleanses us so that we can fulfill the mission that God's given us. In 2:2, he talks about us being intent on one purpose, and that purpose is the spread of the gospel. The mission is to make Jesus known. And how many of us have embraced that mission above and beyond everything else in our lives? We talk about it, but we keep getting distracted from it. Paul says to live this way to prove ourselves mission worthy. And to be mission worthy, he says blameless, innocent, children of God, above reproach. Okay? And people who live this way live in stark contrast to a desperately dark and dying world. Think about it. You look up at night. He uses the stars. When you look up at night, yeah, there's a lot of black, but your eyes fixate on the points of light. See, God said to us, let our lives live and shine as lights so that they see our good works and give glory to God. When you live according to God's will for your life, by the power of the Holy Spirit, you stand out in a crooked and perverse. People go, that person is different, and I like that different. Something is different about them. It points them back to Jesus. The contrast between dark and light is powerful. Think about stumbling in the dark to get that baby for feeding while not trying to wake up the other child, right? And as parents, you know the importance of kids putting their toys away, right? Because if they don't, you stumble and step on those Legos and they hurt, right? Okay? In darkness, we don't see well. We don't do well. God says, let your light shine. It matters the way we live, not to earn anything from God, but as God's representatives. When you are kind to those who are not kind to you, you are pointing them to Jesus. You live in contrast to the rest of the world. When you do marriage God's way, when you wait to have sexual intimacy until you're married to honor your future spouse, when you husbands sacrificially love your wives, you are acting as a contrast to our world. When you don't complain at work, what a contrast to most others. See how that works, the contrast, the light with the dark. Well, they were living by God's power, good and holy lives that would point people to the one true God. And they also were partnering in the gospel through personal sacrifice. Now, we've already seen the sacrifice financially, and we've talked a little bit about this, the sacrifice of sending Epaphroditus, but they were sacrificing personally by taking hits from the culture for what they believed. And many of them were under incredible hardship because of their faith in Jesus. Listen to Philippians 1:29. Speaking of the Philippians, for to you it has been granted for Christ's sake, not only to believe in him, but also to suffer for his sake, experiencing the same conflict which you saw in me, and now here to be in me. We need to be people that are shaped by the cross and the resurrection. Persecution makes you a cross-centered people. Persecution forces us to make the decision. Who will we follow? I heard a quote that went like this: when you become a Christian, you decide to be a martyr, then all other decisions about life are then made for you. You will give up your positions. You will give up your job. You will give up your kids. Why? For the sake of the cross. We see Joseph, if you know the story, if you don't, go back and read Genesis. He gives up, no, not Joseph, Moses. Go back to Exodus. Moses gives up living in Pharaoh's home for God's calling. He gives up the pleasures of Egypt to follow God in everything. We see the value of Christ in the parable of the treasure hidden in the field, excitement in giving everything up to gain Christ. Are we willing to put our lives on the line for him in the sake of the gospel, willing to take less pay, willing to move, or willing to stay where it's not comfortable? Ministry will break your heart. You pour yourself into someone and they bail. You work hard to get your community group notes ready and half the people don't show up. You have creative ideas to teach our children in our children's ministry, and my kids won't settle down and listen to you. Amen? You can't say that about my kids anymore now. They've graduated, all right? But anyways, that happens, right? Ministry breaks our hearts. Paul experienced the heartbreak of ministry. Yet because of God's call in his life, there's nothing else he would rather invest his life in other than the gospel. He says this in Philippians 14. Nevertheless, you have done well to share with me in my affliction. We can say we believe something, but let's see if we live it out. Christianity begins with belief, but it doesn't end there. True belief goes on to change the way we live, the way we act. All right, a couple more ways they partnered. They also partnered in the gospel by using their gifts and skills. Paul says of Timothy, but you know of his proven worth. He served with me in the furtherance of the gospel like a child serving his father. Timothy served wherever he was needed, and many of you do that here at the Fields. We keep track of who's serving in our various ministries, and according to our stats, about 45% of you are actively engaged serving at least monthly. That's a pretty good stat. Most stats are 20% of the people in a church do 80%, but that 45% should be 100%. We all should be serving somewhere, okay? It doesn't have to be on a ministry team. And maybe that number's higher when you look at who really is serving in other ways that we don't track or can't track. But the whole body is needed. 1 Corinthians 12 says that. Now, as you came in today, you saw that there was a card there. If you go to your connection card, there's a QR code. This is a way for you to take a look and go, where are some of the service needs? Again, no guilt here at all. It's an opportunity to get in the game. I want to play. Here's some ways. Use this card. Use your connection card. Fill out the digital connection card. Say, I'll serve wherever. You know, I heard one time somebody refer to this new building that we got into 8 years ago. It's not new anymore. But do you view the building as a home or a hotel? If you view this building as a hotel, what do you do when you check out a hotel? Do you change the sheets? No. Do you pick up you might pick up the towels, but they're dirty, right? Do you wash them? No. You know, a hotel, somebody else is going to take care of it. A home, we take care of it. We save a lot of money here by us doing a lot of the maintenance and the care of the building. That's a way to serve. Think about our meals. Today, we have a meal for you. Oh, I'm looking forward to that. I'm hungry. Are you guys hungry? I think we have a meal. It's the third Sunday. We do, don't we? Yeah? Somebody say yes? If I lie, we always have a meal on the first and third. Somebody put that together. Somebody paid for it. Somebody's going to serve you today. There's ways to serve in the body of Christ. I want to point you to something that's pretty amazing and is actually true and in your Bibles. In 1 Corinthians 3:6, Paul says this, I planted, Apollos watered, but God was causing the growth. So neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but God causes the growth. So the attention is what God is doing, but Paul did something. He planted. Apollos did something. He watered. Now he who plants and he who waters are one, but each will receive his own reward according to his labor. For we are God's, now here's what I want to point you. We are God's fellow workers. In the Greek, that's soon, together, ergo, work. We are God's co-workers. Isn't that a weird thing? The God of the universe calls us his co-workers. You are God's field, God's building. The God of the universe invites you to be his co-worker. So we learn to serve God by serving each other and his bride. Here at the Fields, we are not attempting to fill slots. That's not our goal. We believe you grow as a disciple. When you serve, Jesus said that. When you give your life away, you find it. The greatest of you is the servant. We grow as his followers when we learn to serve and serve his church, the body. All right, we're almost done. The last way they partnered in the gospel was simply by sharing it with others. Brethren, join in following my example and observe those who walk according to the pattern you have in us. I already read that, but what do we see? His pattern? He shared the gospel. He says, follow my example. Okay? Philippians 1:8. What then? Only that in every circumstance, whether in pretense or truth, Christ is proclaimed, and in this I will rejoice. These folks were sharing the gospel verbally. The gospel, by being the very nature of what it is, it's news, it has to be proclaimed. But the gospel also has to be lived out. You live your life in light of the good news. It affects the way I live because of what I believe. And so the gospel is both proclaimed and it's lived out. And when you are interested in something, what do? You talk about it. Naturally, I talk about my kids. You don't have to force me to. Naturally, I talk about the Super Bowl. You don't have to force me to. Some of you, we'd have to force you to, okay? Some of you don't want to talk about it now, all right? But I don't have to talk about the things I'm interested being forced into that. I talk about them because I love them. When I get in an Uber, Jesus almost always comes up. Now, you may not be like that, but he's on your heart. If you love him, you're thinking about him, you're looking for those opportunities to be his light in the community. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. You know, we used to tell people, evangelism is not about inviting somebody to church. Now I say, you know what, if you want to invite somebody to church, bring it on. That's great. We have people come every Sunday that don't know Jesus, and we are glad they're here. It's awesome. But what we're really hoping and aiming for is this idea of being a church without walls, is that you take this good news we're talking about out beyond the walls into the community, and that he shows up in our conversations with others. That's what really gets us excited. And that's what the Philippians were doing. They were following his example and proclaiming the gospel. Invite them in, go out and tell them. Either way, point them to Jesus. We're going to wrap up. And I want to wrap up with those words that Paul said. At the beginning of his letter, he said this: I thank my God in all my remembrance of you, always offering prayer with joy in my every prayer for you all, in view of your participation, your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now. This partnership is based on a love for God and a love for each other. That's the foundation. Yes, there's duty, responsibility, and calling, but it's based on love. And the supreme motive for doing anything is love. Jesus says, if you love me, what? You'll keep my commands. We're called to keep his commands, but not out of duty, out of love. And that's what this partnership is, an invitation, and it comes out of our lives. Going back to Matt Chandler's quote, if we're feeling guilty, we're not loving Jesus enough. It's not a guilt call. It's I get to be in the game. Wow, this is so cool. God has invited us as his co-workers. There's a lot of things out there that are vying for your attention: sports, school, community clubs, social stuff. But here we have an opportunity to partner for the sake of the gospel, something that is truly worth living for. It's our identity as the people of God. So a good question to ask this morning is, am I just a consumer of the gospel, or am I really a partner? And if I'm a partner, how's God calling me to get involved? What position am I going to play on the team? Folks, our pastors, our ministry team leaders, our community group leaders would love to coach you in that. This week in your community group, say, I don't know where to play. We'll get you there. And we're not going to slide you into a slot. Play around. Try some stuff. It's fun to work out in the garage. Well, for me it is, but wherever it is, it's fun to work alongside God in what he's doing. Use your connection card. Write it down. Say, I don't know where to play. Help me. Coach me. We'll help you, and you'll enjoy it. Let's pray. God, thank you so much for your invitation for us to partner with you. It's really cool that you have extended that to us. Father, I pray that our hearts would just see you in an amazing way, that we would just be able to say, get me off the bench, God. I'm in. And God, through our leaders here at the Fields, you coach us where to play, try out some positions, and we would have joy participating in the gospel. We thank you in your name. Amen.